Welcome. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce Corey Keyes. He's a sociologist and professor emeritus at Emory University, who has advised the CDC as government agencies in Canada, Northern Ireland, and Australia. His new book, Languishing, identifies the state of mental weariness that erodes our self-esteem, motivation, and sense of meaning, and indifference. It's not the same as depression. Languishers are more likely to feel out of control of their lives, uncertain about what they want from the future, and paralyzed when faced with decisions. I expect, unfortunately, that we all know what I'm talking about, but it can lead to serious mental illness and even early mortality. So it's really important to understand this and the causes of it. The larger forces behind its rise are the false promises of the self-help industrial complex, a global moment of intense fear and loss, and a failing healthcare system focused on treating rather than preventing illness. There is so much to be said. I am absolutely thrilled you are here. Welcome, Corey Keyes. You are muted. But while you're unmuting, I'm going to ask you something. I know that you talked about the combination of emotional, psychological, and social well-being that is essential to mental health. What role do you think creative expression or the lack of it plays in the experience of languishing?
Well, I think languishing is this place where we feel stuck, stagnant, empty, kind of like a lost soul. Some people describe it as dying inside. And so I see it as a sort of black hole that sort of sucks in or away our sense of creativity or our ability to express ourselves. My friend and colleague, Adam Grant, who has a new book on hidden potential, writes about his own personal experience with languishing and how he could not finish a particular chapter for months. It just sat. And so languishing is this place that simply sort of, I would say, robs us of our ability to really express ourselves and feel fully alive or human. And as I like to say, we're just like anything else planted on this earth. We're planted here to grow and to feel alive. And when we're languishing, we don't feel alive. We feel sometimes like we're dying inside.
How is it different now than in past eras?
I would not say it's any different than when it was, believe it or not, the eighth deadly sin. Prior to the 12th century, there
Whoa.
was an eighth deadly sin called acedia. Now, a few scholars have considered acedia to be depression, but I read very carefully the desert monks and who were writing about this. And they talk about want for interest in life, not the presence of sadness. And what I think they're really talking about is this state of emptiness that tempted them back then to fill it with distractions, things that would make you feel less empty. And they're temporary fixes. So they knew back then it would lead you to do things that were contrary in that period in time to their spiritual journey.
Wow.
So it's been with us for, I would say, forever. How in the modern world, of course, I can now measure this, and it's no longer a deadly sin. It's now a public health problem, as I say in my book.
Yeah.
So we need to treat it with it's how serious it is today, in the same way the ancient world treated it with its own version of seriousness.
Wow. That just brings such a different context to this experience that often looks like it's from, being too immersed in technology, but
Mm.
it's a human pitfall, huh? So when did you first start being aware of it?
Well, I write about my own experience, and I've had plenty of experiences languishing. And I want to tell you from the start, everyone, that it's a normal reaction. I'm not here to pathologize all of life. Now, languishing does become a problem in the same way that sadness and fear are normal emotional reactions. Just like sadness, when it persists too long and is too strong, it morphs into something that's dysfunctional, and psychiatrists call it depression. The same thing can happen when you're languishing. If you get stuck there for too long, then it becomes a problem. And I experienced that as a teenager. And I'm here to tell you that the studies we've been doing, teenagers in this country and around the world have some of the highest rates of languishing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I first experienced it in a very haunting way. And I write about the fact that one night I was listening to a Sunday night radio show called the King Biscuit Flower Hour, and Jackson Browne was on. And it was 1976, and he had just released his Running on Empty album. And I could not believe that the lyrics of that song, not just the Running on Empty, but what he was writing about. I felt seen for the first time. And he described that emptiness. And he also describes it in the album, The Pretender, and the song, that emptiness, so vividly. And so that's when I first experienced it in a very powerful way. And it directed me, it really did motivate me in my scholarship when I became a professor. I wanted to know if others were feeling that kind of haunting emptiness. Because it was not a place where I felt comfortable at all.
What do you wish when you were suffering with this, someone had told you, or your older self could have told you?
Well, my older self would tell me, where does a young person or a person of any age, I mean, languishing isn't just reserved for the beginning of life. Of course, it's very high at the end of life, but everyone in between languishes as well. Where do you go when you want to find things like meaning in life, mattering, purpose, belonging, contribution, acceptance, and personal growth? There is really no one-stop shop in the same way that we have, say, religion or spiritual traditions or a healthcare system where when you're not feeling well, where do you go?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm here to tell you the data show very clearly that 40 to 50% of all visits to mental and emotional health professionals are people who are languishing, not people with depression or anxiety. And I suspect they have the same experience I had as a graduate student when I went to see a medical profession when I was not feeling well, finishing my dissertation. I didn't fit a diagnosis for depression. So the doctor said, "Corey, you're fine." And literally, he said this: "Go make a cup of tea and talk to your wife." And I felt livid. I felt really, I didn't feel seen or understood. He did not understand that this was a form of suffering that's very different from mental illness. And he felt content. He smiled when I didn't fit the criteria for a mental illness. He said, "You're fine, Corey. Get back in life." And so from then on, I saw this as I had a very strong purpose to make this and other people like me seen, because I feel invisible. I don't know about you all, but I feel like a ghost and invisible, and like I'm disappearing when I'm languishing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only way I can describe it. It's like you recede into the background. It's almost like you barely exist. Nobody sees you, and there's nobody there who cares about this. And I think that needs to change, because this is a serious, serious issue.
And I think that just being able to talk about it with other people is so healing, because as you said, it's common. And hearing the context go beyond this culture, which clearly produces it, to appreciating that it is part of the human condition. We need meaning. And you don't get meaning once and then it keeps going on.
Mm-mm.
So, what is your sort of centering approach when you feel yourself languishing?
Well, I write about in the book and that what I've come to call the 5 vitamins for addressing essentially flourishing deficiency. And it's based on research. I don't go out recommending things that aren't situated in some good science. And this was a study of a long-term study, a longitudinal study of people who were flourishing, languishing, or had depression. And what they first found is people who are flourishing do 5 things quite regularly. They engage in some form of helping others or something. They engage in some form of learning just for their own sake, not because it's tied to their job or getting better at their right at their work, just for the sake of learning and growing. The third is that they engage in some form of meaningful connection and nurturing warm, trusting relationships and a sense of belonging.
Mhm.
Fourth, they engage in what I called some form of transcending, a form of spiritual or religious practice. And if you're not religious or spiritual, some people engage in some form of a philosophical practice like Stoicism.
Mhm.
And the last is they regularly engage in some form of play or some form of active leisure where they get out and do leisure rather than consume it. But
Mhm.
here's the good news. The people who are depressed or languishing who did more of one of those things each day. Now, you don't have to do all 5 in one day. You just pick one and you do enough of it. If you're languishing or depressed, you begin to move out of that state towards flourishing. You don't jump from 1 to 10 in a month. It's a
Mhm.
long-term process. But the result is you start to have better days. And if you're flourishing, another great equalizer. If you do nothing, you don't have you have as bad of a day as someone who's depressed or languishing who does nothing.
Mhm.
If you do nothing for too long, you begin to drift out of flourishing and start to languishing.
Mhm.
So those 5 things, I call them kind of like a vitamin because
Well,
languishing is kind of like being anemic. You become sluggish.
your imagery is so perfect. This is a great place to take a break. And I really want to come back to this. And I'm just so honored that you are offering this to this community. We talk about this in different language.
Mm.
Your gift of giving us not just the idea and the differentiation between depression, but by providing the historical fact that this is not just about a context in time. Thank you for that. And we will return. I'm going to stop recording for right now. Thank you.